Hello, good afternoon, or if you're in another time zone, good morning, good evening, good night, I guess. Thank you for joining me. My name is Natalie. I am founder of Aardvark, which is an accessibility testing tool. And every other Wednesday afternoon at this time, I do a live stream on some topic about accessibility for all different audiences, all different levels. Today is a pretty developer focused stream, but we're not looking at super complicated HTML. So, and we're just going to look at a little bit of JavaScript and CSS. So, even if you're a beginner level with those, you should probably be able to follow along. Other streams we do are more focused on, website owners, absolute beginners, no code type topics. Last time we looked at WCAG 3, the specification, where it is, how far along it is, should we be worried about it? So if you're curious about those things, you can check out the last recording. We are live streaming to 3 platforms simultaneously. So we are on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. So if you're on any one of those platforms and you start to have some trouble with the stream, you could just jump over to one of the other platforms. Sometimes, one of them's a little glitchy for whatever reason. And you can get the whole archive of all of our past live streams on YouTube and LinkedIn. Facebook, for some reason, deletes them after 30 days. So you could get just the last 2, yes, for Facebook. But yeah, so welcome. It's so nice to have you here. We're in the middle of a heat wave here in Los Angeles. It's about 100 degrees. So my air conditioning is running. Hopefully you don't hear it too badly on the stream. I think I did set it to filter out background noise, and the air conditioner's in another room, so it shouldn't be too bad. All right, so today we're going to dig into building modal dialogues. And I'm going to demo it real quick just so we're all on the same page. This is what I'm talking about. Oh, let me close the browser console. When you have one of these windows like this, right, like a little window that opens, it's got usually some kind of overlay that dims out the page behind it. And, you could have any kind of content at all in that little pop-up. Sometimes it's just information, right? Just saying like, oh, by the way, you need to know this. Other times it's interactive, like this one. It's actually a little form to fill out. It could be anything that's in this box. So this is called a modal dialog. They can also be non-modal. I could show an example of that later. But we're very specifically focused on modal dialogues for today. And until relatively recently in the world of HTML, we only had divs to use to build these. And there are still, I feel like more component libraries than not still have an old modal built from a div. And we're gonna show an example of that today and how to update it to bring it into 2026. Because we have some really nice code that takes care of a lot of the different concerns with a modal. So let's actually talk about that for a second. I'm going to go over to Charlie Triplett's Atomic Accessibility, and we're on the header. Let's go to, let me find modal here, dialog modal. All right, so if you're not familiar with this website, it's atomica11y.com. It is a project by Charlie Triplett. And I'm on the HTML tab. There's also design, iOS, and Android, but we're talking about HTML today. Down the left-hand side, there are all different types of components that you would use to build a website, right? Like basically every web page is some assembly of these elements, right? We see breadcrumbs, buttons, links, navigation, chat, footnotes, landmarks, tabs, forms, different form fields, et cetera, et cetera. And basically what you can do is you can check these off and it will give you your acceptance criteria for if you're building that thing. So here's our acceptance criteria for a dialog modal. And it will tell us our acceptance criteria for keyboard and also for screen reader. So these are the requirements for an accessible modal dialog. And when people build them from scratch using just divs, they tend to miss one or more of these things. So let's just take a real quick look at what these are. So when I use the tab key to move focus to the launch button and use spacebar and or enter key to activate the button, I see the dialog opens. Now, of course, that's assuming that there's some kind of button press that opens the dialog. It could be something else that triggers it. Then when I use the arrow keys, I see content is browsed in a meaningful order with content behind the dialog remains inert. Then when I use the tab key, I see focus moves to interactive controls in the dialog and the content behind the dialog remains inert. So basically, while the dialog is open, I can't tab out of the dialog and start tabbing through the content of the page behind it. Then when I see the tab key, oh, sorry, I already read that one. Then when I use the escape key, I see focus returns to the launch button. Or when I use the tab key to move focus to the dismiss or close button and then use the space bar or enter key to activate the dismiss or close button, I see focus returns to the launch button. So some of those may have been a surprise to you that you may not have known were actually requirements for modal dialogs. And then for screen readers, I use the tab key to move focus to the launch button. I hear the dialog describes its purpose or title on launch. I hear it identifies itself as a dialog. I hear when it closes that focus returns to the launch button, and I hear when it open, the content behind the dialog remains inert. And then when I use the arrow keys, I hear content is browsed in a meaningful order and content behind the dialog remains inert. And then when I use the tab key, I hear focus moves to interactive controls in the dialog. Content behind the dialog remains inert. And then when I use the escape key, I hear focus returns to the launch button. Or when I use the tab key to move focus to a dismiss or close button, and then use the spacebar or enter key to activate the close button, I hear focus returns to the launch button. All right, so modal dialog should be doing all of those things. And we get a whole bunch of those for free, basically, when we use semantic HTML elements for building out modal dialogs. So that's what we're going to take a look at today. All right, so let's take a look at the modal you might already have, because like I said, I see way too many component libraries still using this method of building modals. So it is entirely possible that if you take a look at your code, that this is what you've got. So here's my page, the hand-rolled version. And let's do a few tests of this dialog. And we'll just figure out what we missed and what we got right. All right, so the first thing is let's go ahead and test the keyboard. So I'm going to tab to this button that I know launches the dialog. I'm going to click the button. So I open the dialog, so that's all good. I can tab. And when I get to the last button there, I can't tab forward anymore. Let's try going backwards. So I go backward through all of the focusable elements and So if you can see there, the button that launched this dialog got focus. So I was able to get focus moved out of this dialog and spill it out into the page. So that would be a failure that we would need to fix. All right, and then if we go back in here and we click the send link, tab, I can't get anywhere, which I don't think is the best experience. I actually prefer when a dialog cycles you through the items in the dialog, right? And the other thing is that my keyboard should be trapped in the dialog as long as it's open, but only in the sense of the current page, right? I shouldn't be prevented from switching the browser tabs or switching to a different window or any of those other things. And when we get to something like this, where we just tap, 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 we can't get back to the browser Chrome going this way. So that's an issue that we need to take a look at. And then if I put my mouse over the overlay and scroll, I can still scroll the page behind. So that's not ideal. If I hit the escape key on my keyboard, because we heard that in those acceptance criteria, nothing happens. So I'm hitting it now. Repeatedly, nothing happens. And if I go ahead and hit, let's see. Well, I can't even hit the send link button. All right, so let me go back to this close link and close it. I can see focus just gets dropped. So nothing that's visible on the page right now has focus. So the focus did not return to the button that opened that dialog. So these are all really common issues that you'll find if you start doing accessibility testing of modals on the web in general. And like I said, you might have a modal like this somewhere on your website with one or more of those failures. So you probably want to go check it out. Okay, so let's take a look at the code behind this one. So I've got the stage 0 file open over here. I'm just making sure my head isn't blocking any of the code. All right, I think we're all good. And so you can see this page, it's got a whole bunch of content on it that's just there so that to make sure the page is long enough to scroll. So I'm not too worried about that. And I've actually collapsed that div that holds all of that content because we're not really interested in that. All right, and let's take a look at the markup that actually makes up our dialog. So first off, we have a div. That's our fake backdrop. You may have called it an overlay. You may have called it something else. And it's hidden by default, and then we make it visible when we open the dialog. You may or may not have a shim of some kind that's holding your dialog to make sure that you can manage the Z index and that your dialog and your overlay show up on top of content, right? That's another issue that we commonly see is you open a dialog and there's, a support button or a chat with us button or some other content is popping out on top of our modal or on top of the overlay. So this modal shim, that's one of the ways that we work around it. And then we've got a div with a role of dialog, aria modal equals true, and it has an ID, so we can refer to it in JavaScript. And then the rest of this is all the content, right? We have that little form that's in the modal, so the rest of that is all of our content. All right, and let's take a look at what the JavaScript looks like. So we need to refer to a whole bunch of different elements. So we're capturing the shim, the backdrop, the share button, which is the button that actually opens the modal, the close button, which actually is the little X in the top right corner of the modal, the cancel button, which is the cancel button at the bottom of the form, and we also have the modal itself. We have to grab a array basically of the focusables. So any of the focusable elements that are inside the modal, we need to know what those are because we need to trap focus in the modal. And so we're setting up that selector, and then we're going to get the first and last one because we need to do some kind of special handling on the first and last one to keep focus from going outside of the modal. We have our function that opens the modal, right, which makes the shim visible, that makes the backdrop visible, that puts focus on the close button, and then also adds an event listener to trap focus inside the modal, right? So I'm going to be listening for that key down event and keeping focus from going outside the modal. I have a close modal, which hides the shim, hides the backdrop, removes that event listener for the key down because I don't need to worry about that anymore. Here's my focus trap function. That's just going to make sure that I can't get outside the modal, but we saw it was broken, and I can tell you exactly why it was broken. And then we have we're adding our event listeners, right? So there's quite a lot of code in here, and it still doesn't meet our acceptance criteria for an accessible modal dialog. So we need to add even more code in here to make it accessible, right? Like we need to handle the fact that the focus capture is broken. We need to handle that the escape key doesn't work, right? All of the other things that I showed you all have to be handled. So what if I told you that we can actually fix those things, not by adding more code to take care of those situations, but actually by removing a bunch of code here and then changing just a couple of things. So that is the advantage of marking up a modal like it's 2026 and taking advantage of all of the latest semantic HTML that we have available to us in order to make a modal work with the least amount of work and the least amount of code. So we're going to take a look at how we can do that. All right. And just in case I mess this up, I do have the final result saved over here, but I'm going to try it. I'm going to try code editing live, which what could possibly go wrong? I did practice it and I made a mistake, but I think I could do it now. Okay. All right. So let's go first into our script. And the first thing that we're going to get rid of just altogether is this trap focus function. We don't need that anymore. So we're going to get rid of that. And then we can get rid of our add and remove event listener that are inside our open and close modal. We don't need those anymore because they're calling that trap focus function that I just deleted. So we don't need those anymore, which means that we don't need all of these focusable things. So let's go ahead and get rid of all of that. We're not going to need that anymore. We can actually get rid of that backdrop. So let's scroll back up here to the top of the modal. Here's my fake backdrop. I'm actually going to just delete that. I actually don't need that anymore. We don't need to put a separate div for making the overlay. This is going to take care of it for us, which means now I've got to get rid of anywhere that backdrop gets mentioned in the JavaScript. So there's backdrop, and there's backdrop. I think that's all of them. Oh, no, there's another one. Backdrop. All right. And we're not going to worry about this. This is just, I'll show you what that is real quick. There's a little toggle to show another field. And that's fine. We're going to leave that there. All right. So I've got rid of the backdrop. I don't need the shim either. So let's go ahead and get rid of that shim. So that's right here. And I'm going to go get the closing tag first. I think that's easier. Scroll back up, get rid of the shim. I don't need that anymore. So now I can go to the JavaScript and get rid of anywhere we mentioned the shim. So no shim, no shim. And I think that's it. Okay. And then we're going to change the code that makes up our modals. So we're going to go back up here. We're going to change this div to a dialog. I'm actually going to do it at the bottom first. Closing tag. We're going to make it actually a semantic HTML dialog tag. So if you've got a dialog like this, this is what you can do for yours too. And because a dialog already has a role of dialog, we don't need to say it again. So that we can get rid of. We can also get rid of this aria modal true. We don't need that anymore. We'll keep the ID because we do still want to be able to refer to this easily in JavaScript. All right. And we got rid of already the modal. Okay, so now we just need to go back down here. Let me review my code real quick. So the share button, the close button, the cancel button, the modal. Okay, so I think I need all of those things. Now my function for the modal, oh, did I actually delete my closing curly bracket? Okay. So this we're just gonna say modal show modal. So that's gonna be our, oops, you have to spell modal correctly, otherwise it doesn't work. All right, so that's gonna be our function to actually open the modal, right? So I'm still referring to it by its ID. So modal.show modal. And then down here, let's see, show shim is still left there. Let's go ahead and get rid of that. Oh, I see. That was the rest of my function. All right, we're just going to leave it at that. And then our close modal, we're going to say modal dot close, I think. All right. And then, so we're calling the open modal function when we click on our share button, and we're calling close modal our function whenever we click the close button or the cancel button. All right. Fingers crossed. Let's see if I did it all right. Like I said, I've got a saved version of it just in case I mess something up, because JavaScript, you mess up one line, nothing works. All right, let's take a look. Oh, it works. So you notice I deleted that overlay div, but we still have an overlay. And if I tab, my focus is confined to the modal, right? Now, on either end of the modal, I can get back out to the browser Chrome, but that's actually expected. But you can see going out either end of the modal, I can't actually get to the content behind the modal, right? So I can't access any of the web content that's behind that overlay, but I still have easy access to my browser Chrome, to other windows, right? I can get out of that very easily, but I can't access anything else on the page. All right. So that's taken care of for me. And if I hit the escape key, now that works by magic. Hey, we didn't add any code to handle that because it's built into that dialog element. And what do you know? You see this blue outline here? This button got focus back when we closed it. So we mostly just deleted a bunch of code. We changed a couple lines, and now it's working better. We solved a whole bunch of problems that we had. So that is how much less code using semantic HTML to build a dialog is. So much easier, so much faster, and it handles a lot of the behavior for you. So it takes care of having an overlay. It takes care of any of those weird z-index problems that required us to have the shim. It's going to be on top of everything, no matter what else happens to be here, even if it's got a z-index of 999999999, right? This is going to be on top. It took care of returning focus to whatever the trigger was that opened it. It took care of trapping focus inside the modal as long as it was open, but still allowed the focus to go out to the browser Chrome and to my other windows. So I have a much better version with way less code than what we had before. And I also have stage 1, the native dialog, which is the same thing. As we just built from the stage 0 file. So we got all of that for free. We didn't have to write all those like key down listeners to listen for the escape key. We didn't have to write code, right? There was a comment in here saying that focus wasn't handled to send focus back to the button that opened the modal. Like, we didn't have to do any of that. We got all of that for free. All right, so let's dig in, because there are some things left that we still have to handle on our own. And the first one is that a dialog should have an accessible name. And that name would get announced when the dialog opens in the screen reader. So a screen reader user would quickly understand what a dialog is about. Any given web page may have multiple dialogues, right? We might have a dialog to confirm something. We might have a dialog to say, sign up for my newsletter. We might have a dialog for confirm that you want to delete an item from your cart, right? So there could be multiple on the same page. And it's really helpful for a screen reader user that as soon as the dialog opens, that they can hear an accessible name of it so they understand what the dialog is doing. So by using that dialog, the semantic HTML dialog tag, that ensures that the dialog is going to be announced as a dialog, but we still have to give it an accessible name. So let me open up a screen reader, and I'm on my Mac today. So this is going to be VoiceOver, and I am using Chrome. So VoiceOver with Chrome, and we're going to see what happens when I open the dialog here that does not have a name. And then I'm going to flip to the stage 2 tab as a quick preview of what it sounds like when it does have an accessible name. It's actually interesting because it's different, but only subtly different because of the way it gets handled when it doesn't have a name. So let me fire up the screen reader first. So give me a sec.
Voiceover on.
All right. And I'm going to go ahead. It looks like I'm already on that button. So I'm going to go ahead and click to open the modal, and we'll hear what VoiceOver has to say.
Share this report and 10 more items. Dialog. Close button. You are currently on.
Okay. So we heard that it said, it read the heading, the headline that we have there, share this report that I have here on the screen, right?
Share this report, level 1.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, VoiceOver. All right. So it read that, and then it says a dialogue that it had 10 more items in it. It said, share this report and 10 other items, dialogue, right? And then let me know that I was on the close button of the dialogue. So that's another thing to notice, that our focus went straight to the close button in the dialogue as soon as it was open, right? We didn't write code to do that. We get that code for free. We get that for free with our native dialogue. So what it's going to do is it's just going to move focus to the first element inside the modal that can receive focus. All right. And I have a question from David, who's asking, so it's actually best practice to be able to tab out of a modal instead of cycling through its controls. Seems counterintuitive to tab into the browser Chrome without explicitly exiting the dialogue, at least to me. You will definitely see lots of dialogues where you cycle through, and that's better than not trapping focus on them at all. But I do think if you are a mouse user, you don't need to close the dialog to switch your browser tab or activate a plugin or switch to a different window, right? Like, you have that option. So I just feel like a keyboard user should also have that option. They shouldn't have to close the dialog to be able to access browser Chrome and do other things, because that's available for mouse users. So it should be available for keyboard users. So that's my opinion on it. I don't know if there's any official guidance on that. I think both of them would technically pass WCAG, like both approaches would pass WCAG. So I think you could make a good case for it either way. But I think if a mouse user is able to get to it, a keyboard user should be able to get to it too. So that is my take on that. All right. So let me switch over to the stage 2 tab, and I'll open the dialog there. And VoiceOver will get kind of noisy while I'm switching, so bear with me for a second, and then we'll hear what the difference is when the dialog has an actual
heading
name.
level 2, group modal, stage 2, modal, stage 2, group modal, web age group to less than access of modal, web new open toolbar modal, in modal, stage 2, named, to share this report button. You are.
All right, I made it. Okay, let me go ahead and trigger the modal, and you'll listen to what it sounds like this time.
Share this report, dialog with 11 items, email address, email. You are.
All right, so that time it announced right away that I have a dialog called share this report. Right, so it did read the heading last time, which I think is interesting. I would not count on all screen reader and browser combinations doing that. That's just a weird quirk of either VoiceOver or VoiceOver with Chrome. So I wouldn't count on that behavior, but you can count more reliably on the dialog actually having an accessible name. So let's go take a look at how we do that. Let me exit out of the screen reader.
VoiceOver off.
All right. So we're going to take a look at this. My class filler is already collapsed. Okay, so here's my dialog. And I'm already looking at stage 2. Okay, here, we'll just review the code that's already written instead of me having to type live on camera, which is always, I don't know, I feel like I type really fast, like maybe 100 words a minute or so. And then when I'm on camera, I type like 2. Or when anybody's watching, it's like, oh, and I make constant typos. So we'll just look at this code here that's already here. So you can see that we're using aria labeled by and referring to share title, which is our H2. that says share this report. So we're officially making the text inside that H2 the accessible name. And then we went ahead here also and used aria described by to pull out that first paragraph that says send a read-only link to this accessibility report. So that's an aria described by. So we would hear, depending on your settings and depending on your screen reader and your browser, etc., you may hear the aria described by read out, or you might hear the browser say, there's more information, press these keys to hear it. One or the other will happen, but both of those bits of information should be immediately accessible as soon as the dialog opens. So make sure your modals have accessible names on them so that as soon as they open, we can immediately understand what they're about. So that is something we still have to do ourselves. All right, the next thing that we still need to do ourselves, and I mentioned this a little bit already, that if I close this and I open it again, all right, oops, let me go back to stage 1. I wanted to show stage 1, sorry. All right, let's refresh and open this. That is not doing what it was doing before, right? There, okay, there we go. I think it was in a weird state. So as soon as the dialog opens, you can see I've got the blue outline here around the close button, and that's the default behavior. So by default, the dialog element is going to, upon open, move focus to the very first thing in the dialog that can receive focus, which most of the time is going to be your close button, if you have one in the top right, most of the time. Now, you can control that, and you do want to be thoughtful about that, about where you move focus, because it should make sense. So you could say that when I'm opening this share report dialog, that I'm here because I said I wanted to share a report. And so the first thing that should be focused is probably this email address field, so that I can just type in an email address and go, and I don't have to tab, I don't have to do anything else. So you can control that. And the easy way to do that is if I go to, let's see, I'm on 1 now and I need to go to 2. If we go to 2 and we look at the input for the email address, you can see it has the autofocus attribute. And so as soon as if I go to 2 over here now, and let me refresh and hopefully I'm not in a weird state, focus lands on that email address field. And it makes it quick and easy. If I'm keyboard only, boom, 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 I could type in the email address, tap, 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 submit the form, and I'm done. So think about like where it would make the most sense. Sometimes it does make sense that focus lands on the close button. Like if I just have just a little informational dialogue, like, hey, some process you were waiting on is done running, or something like that, and I just want to say okay or close this out, that might make sense. But in other cases, when you have forms or buttons, or you might have, like I said, you could have anything in a modal. You might have a carousel, you might have tabs, you might have an accordion in there, right? Like it might make sense to move focus to a different interactive element inside the modal. So be thoughtful about it and think about like what would users be most likely to expect or appreciate there if you're going to change it from the default. Another thing that we do not get for free is, if I go back over here to stage 1, I can still scroll the content behind the modal. And again, that's not a failure. That does not make that content like active in any way. But I do think it is confusing for users that they can still scroll content back there. And I actually like to stop the scrolling, just because I think it helps to communicate that this content is inert and you cannot interact with it in any way. So if I go to, oops, I lost my mouse. There we go. If I go to 2, nope, is it on 3 that I finally did it? Yeah, there we go. So 3, we have the scrolling is locked down. Like I'm trying to scroll You can see my mouse is over here on the left over the overlay, and I cannot scroll up and down the page. So I think that's actually a better experience because it helps reinforce that this content is completely inactive. I can't interact with it right now. And let's take a look at how we did that. All right, I think I have to go to 3. And you can see that we have a scroll locked CSS class that just says overflow hidden. And then if we go to our JavaScript down further in the document, you can see that we are adding and removing that class. There is where it gets added when the modal opens. We're just adding that class to the page, and then we take it off when we close the modal. So that's all there is to it. Very easy to stop that from happening. And I also want to point out that, like, even when we have really simple open and close, that it's still nice to have functions that run. And then I also wanted to point out that the event that we're listening for here is the close of the modal, right? So when I'm looking to run code that's going to run when the modal closes, I am actually listening for the close event of the modal, and I'm not listening for a click or a keyboard interaction on the close button in the modal. So it's a subtle difference, but it's a much better experience because, of course, users have other ways of closing the modal besides clicking one of our close buttons. So you don't want to attach it to that, right? Because the users could come over here, they can hit the escape key, and then that would never get triggered. They can also click on the, well, in this one they can't, but we'll talk about that in a second. They can click on the overlay. Well, maybe not on this one either. Usually you can click on the overlay to dismiss it, right? So there's other ways of dismissing the modal. So you don't want to put like a click event, right? Listening for a click on this button because you're going to miss some of the cases. So always listen for the close event of the modal itself. And that's where you want to put any code that you want to run on the close. All right. And then another little quirk is, let's see, which one has it? This one is if we're doing something kind of weird on our page, and I have this trigger that I'm going to scroll the page just so it's at the very tippy top. And when I click it to open the dialog, that button disappeared. So it's gone from the page now. And I'm going to put it back when I close the dialog, but you'll see that because it's not there at the time the dialog closes, focus doesn't move back to it. So if you have a weird case like this, where whatever your trigger was that opened your modal, maybe it's something you can't return focus to because maybe it was a modal that popped up because they've been sitting on the page for 5 minutes, right? In which case, there's no trigger that you could return focus to. Or you did something like this where the trigger got removed from the page for whatever reason, and now you don't have something to return focus to. Now you need to be really thoughtful. You have to be a thoughtful developer and figure out what should I do with focus. And I would say if it's a case where it's triggered by not by a direct user interaction, but it's triggered by, like I said, I want to show some kind of message when the user's been sitting on the page for 5 minutes. I would say at the time that you open the dialog, capture where their focus is and then put it back there when you close the dialog so that they can go back to whatever they were doing uninterrupted. If you don't intentionally do that, focus is just going to end up at the top of the page. And they're going to have to tap, right? Like back to where they were, which is really annoying. So in cases where there's not a trigger to return the focus to, be thoughtful about what you do with it. And it's not hard at all to just check what's the active element in the document right before you open the modal, and then return focus back to that element so that they can continue uninterrupted. All right. And then we have, I wanted to talk about, let's see, I'm on 3, I think. Form. Let's go up to my dialogue. Do I have a form? Yes, I have a form. And here I have a method for dialogue. So when I have a form with a method of dialogue, submitting doesn't actually send the request anywhere. So if you want to send the request, you got to take care of that yourself. So get some JavaScript, get it together, send it Ajax in the background, whatever you need to do. And then it's going to just set a return value to whatever button that was pressed to close the dialog. So we can take a look at that over here. So you can see, let me refresh the page. We'll start over. So share this report. If I click send link, I can't because I have to fill out the form. But if I click cancel, you can see the return value is cancel. If I open it again and hit the escape key, return value dismissed with escape. This close button, the return value is dismiss because the name of that button was dismiss. And like I said, anything that I filled out on that form, I have to, it's my job to capture that. But that's what the form method of dialogue is going to do, is it's going to close that form without submitting it anywhere and just give you back that return value that'll tell you how the dialogue got closed. That's all you get to know. Now you can grab, of course, you can grab all of those details out of the form with JavaScript and do whatever you like with them, but just know that nothing happens with that with just the form dialogue or the form method dialogue. All right. I think there's a new interesting attribute that we can add to dialogues, which is called closed by, which we can look at. This is brand new in 2026. So new that it is not yet supported in Safari, which is why I couldn't use Safari as my browser today. And you can see that I've got some text here that says this browser supports the closed by attribute. And if I do open up Safari and go there, you can see this browser does not support closed by yet. So there was a Safari preview released at the end of July that had the support for it. So it should be supported in Safari very soon. They are working on it. It's the last browser standing that doesn't support it. And what this will do is it lets us specify how we want the what methods of closing the dialog we want to be available to the user. And we have 3 possible attributes. So let's just take a look at it over here. This is our closed by attribute for the dialog. And we've got 3 possible values. If we say any, which is the default, the dialog can be dismissed using any of the 3 methods. So the 3 methods being the escape key, clicking on the overlay, and then using some kind of developer specified button inside the dialog. If we say none, the dialog will only close by the developer specified mechanism. So escape won't work, clicking on the overlay won't work anymore. And you would only want to use that if you had a compulsory dialog. For legal reasons, somebody's either got to accept the terms of service or they got to leave the site right now, right? And they don't have another choice. They shouldn't be able to close that dialog. They should only be able to make their choice, like I accept them or I don't accept them in the dialog, and they shouldn't be able to close it another way. So it should be a pretty extreme case. And you don't want to use that all the time, but it is available for you when you need to use it. And I got a question for what is a modal dialog. So let me just demo that real quick one more time. So we're just talking about this kind of little box. This is a modal dialog right here. So it opens up on a page. There's usually some kind of overlay behind it, and it can have any kind of content inside of it. It could just be a confirmation. It could just be information. Or like this, it could be interactive form. It could be carousel. It could be any kind of information. All right. And then we also have close request. So with a platform-specific user action or a developer-specified mechanism. So that's kind of in between these two, where this is going to accept any way of closing it. This accepts only the developer-specified mechanism, and this one, I think, still supports escape, but not the overlay click. But we'll double check. We'll test it over here. So we've got this tested over here. Let me go ahead and refresh the page. And so this one has none. So let me go ahead and open this one. And you can see I can hit escape, that I don't get out of here. I click on the overlay, I don't get out of here. I have to choose one of these two options. So if you have a dialogue that's, for legal reasons, probably would be my imagination, that they have to make one of these two choices. You can disable those other ways of closing the dialogue by using that closed by attribute. And then this one, okay, I got it. There we go. This one, so the escape key still works on this one, and I can still get out of it in different ways. So let's look at stage 4. My stage 4 file. And okay, let's collapse the filler. Here's my modal. So the first button, share this report, is set to any, and the other dialog is set to none. So all 3 methods close this one. So I can hit escape, I can click on the overlay, or of course I can click any of the ways that the developer who built this gave me for closing it out. Whereas this one, for none, my only option is to activate one of these 2 buttons. There's no other way for me to get out of this dialog. So in cases where you have to force a choice, this is how you can do it. And disable the clicking and the escape. So they don't do anything at all. All right. I accidentally just turned down the brightness on my monitor. There we go. I don't know how I even hit that key. I was like, oh, suddenly my screen is black. Okay. All right. So you do have like reasonably graceful degradation from this in Safari if you want to go ahead and use it. And like I said, it should be supported in like a very near future release of Safari, that we'd be able to do that. And then you may have noticed that on this step 4 page, new for dialogues, is the ability to animate them. I'm going to really slow it down to 2 seconds so we can really get a feel for it, that we are animating that into the screen. And it animates back out very slowly. All right. So being able to control that mechanism and have some kind of animation happening is also relatively new. So let's take a look at how that happens. Look at the stage 4. And we are mostly looking at CSS. So there's my, you can add some CSS to style your modal. Right, we're setting some CSS properties here, modal motion, 800 milliseconds, modal ease. And then here's my modal. And I have a transition that I'm specifying here. So opacity, translate, and scale. So why animate one attribute when you can animate 3? And then do know that this allow discrete is required for this to work for both the display and the overlay. So we're animating both of those things in. And then we can say our starting style. So where we're going to start from for the animation. And you can see I have an opacity of 0, a translate of 0 to -6 rems, and a scale of 0.8. So when I animate this in, which will happen real slow again, we could see it doing those 3 things. Right, kind of sliding down, fading in, and scaling a little bit. All right, now I think I have it open here somewhere. Yes. All right, so these are my system settings for my computer, and I'm in the accessibility section. Now, depending on what version of Mac OS you have, this setting may be in a different section. So you may find it under display. There would be a setting called reduce motion. But on my version, there's a separate section called motion that here's my reduce motion. And if I go ahead and toggle that on and we come back over here and I click cancel, you can see no animation. I didn't have to refresh the page. I didn't have to do anything. If I click it again, you can see that this dialog shows up with absolutely no animation on it. And that is not just from toggling this setting. So toggling that setting is one thing, but actually listening for that setting is another thing altogether, which I have right here in my code. This is how you can listen for people who prefer reduced motion. And they may have a vestibular disorder, they may have an attention disorder, they may have any number of reasons, migraines, vertigo, etc., where they may not like having a lot of animation on the screen. And you can detect that setting in both CSS and JavaScript. And this is the way that you can detect it in CSS with a media query that checks if prefers reduce motion is set to reduce. And if it is, you can see that I'm setting the transition duration to just 0.01 milliseconds, translate none, scale none. So I'm just removing the animation altogether for people who have said that they prefer reduced motion. So any user can go into their settings, and this, I'm on a Mac now, but there's a identical setting for Windows. So any user can go in and enable that. I usually have it enabled. I actually had to come in here and disable it for this live stream for today. I usually have this enabled, and I will tell you, if I had to take a wild guess, 99% of websites don't respect my setting. And I think that it is just developers don't know that this is something that they can do. That if you're adding animation to a site, you can check and make sure that the user has said that they are okay with those animations, and only show them if they are. So really easy to remove that in case you didn't want it. And you can also see that with modal : backdrop is how I can style my overlay. So by default, right, at least in Chrome, it shows up as like a black with some transparency on it. But if I wanted it to be purple, pink, red, right, like you can style that with CSS. So you can make it whatever color you would like. And so you have full control over the design of it, even though it is built into the native dialog element, right? It just comes with that backdrop. If you wanted to hide the backdrop, wanted to make it like opacity 0, go ahead. You can make it look however you would like. You have full control over it. You want it to be a gradient, you can do that. So you have a lot of control over what that looks like. All right, I'm going to leave my reduced motion on again because that's how I like it. And so we're not going to see any animation here when I open that up. All right, and I did put this on here just because I wanted to make sure, the quality of the live stream, like I wanted to make sure that the animation was super visible. All right, so that is everything I have to share with you about modal dialogues for today. So if you are currently working with a component library or some old code that has your dialogues built with divs and piles of JavaScript to try to handle all the different behavior that a dialog should display, well, I just showed you how easy it is to just mostly delete a bunch of code and convert those over to native dialog elements that are going to give you a whole bunch of that functionality for free. You don't have to write it anymore. You can delete it out of your JavaScript. You don't have to deal with it. I also showed you which parts of the process you do still have to take care of on your own. So the browser takes care of containment, so making sure that the tabs, that the focus stays inside and doesn't leak out to the page and behind, making sure that that content behind is inert, making sure the escape button works, unless we explicitly disable it with the closed by attribute, that focus returns to whatever element open the dialog, unless of course there isn't an element or the element was removed from the page, in which case that's on us. We need to figure that out. The browser takes care of making sure that that dialog is on top of anything else that happens to be on our page, even if it's got a crazy z-index. Right? So we get a whole bunch of functionality for free there. What's still on us to handle is making sure our dialog has an accessible name, making sure that we're being intentional about where focus lands. So like I said, by default, most of the time, it's going to end up on the close button. Oops, we didn't. I have to go back to an earlier one. On the close button like this, because that is the first interactive element in most modal dialogues. If you think it should be moved somewhere else, you can move it somewhere else with the autofocus. You do want to be intentional about it and make sure that you are helping the user by doing that, and that you're moving the user to something where they would reasonably expect focus to be. If you want to disable this background scroll, that's still on you. That is not included. And like I said, that's not a violation. I just think it's nice for reinforcing that that content back there is not interactive. And then deciding where focus returns to if my trigger isn't there or there isn't a trigger. So those things you still have to do on your own. So remember that just adding like Aria, what did I have over here? Oh, I already deleted it. I had Aria something modal. I forget what it was now. Right, just writing that doesn't do anything. So a lot of the ARIA attributes, they don't actually do anything on their own. You still have to write JavaScript to make those things work. And so when you put those ARIA attributes into your HTML, and the only time that you have to do that is if you're not using the dialog tag. So actually, let me go back. I saved the original. Let's take a look. I knew I would have to come back to this for some reason. Can I just drag this over here? All right, here's my original. Let's close up the filler. And here is my dialog built with a div, right? Okay, aria modal equals true. That's what I had on here. I can't remember what it was, right? So that doesn't do anything. Like adding that in there is correct because it's going to help a screen reader understand how to announce things. But just adding that doesn't actually do anything. Just adding role dialog on here, again, it makes sure that a screen reader announces this correctly, but it doesn't actually affect the functionality of this div. You're still on the hook to make that work. Where if you just use the semantic element, the dialog, like we did here, you do get a bunch of functionality for free. So remember that if you are making the choice to use a div and give it a role of dialog and give it an ARIA modal attribute of true and maybe some other ARIA attributes, those don't do anything except make sure that a screen reader announces things correctly. All of that functionality is on you to build out. So those ARIA attributes added to divs and spans are a promise that you have to keep by writing out your JavaScript. All right, so here's what I would like for y'all to leave here today and do. Let's go look at your own code anywhere that you have modals and see how they're marked up and see if you can tab out of them while they're open, which is bad. That would be a failure. Make sure that focus is moved to the modal when it opens and stays in there as long as it's open, that when it closes, focus goes back to the trigger. Make sure that you can't get to the content behind the modal, right? Make sure all of those things work. And if you find something that's broken and you're using a div for your modal, try out. Like try switching over to a dialog and see how much code you can delete from your code base, because you don't have to handle that anymore because dialog does it for you. All right, that's it for me today. It's almost exactly 1 hour. I have 1 minute left. All right, so thank you so much for joining me today. So I do this every other Wednesday afternoon. We cover all different accessibility topics. The next one will be on September 9th. I do not yet know exactly what the topic will be. I am playing around with a bunch of different ideas. It probably won't be another developer heavy one because I like to switch them up. So something more focused on non-developers next time, but still useful information for everybody to have. So thank you so much for joining me today. Again, my name is Natalie. I am founder of Aardvark, an accessibility testing tool. Every other Wednesday at this time, we have a live stream where we talk about accessibility in some form. All right, and then I'll just answer a quick question that I got before we sign out for the day, and I'll see you in 2 weeks. So somebody said, could you please suggest some other sources where I can learn back-end development? I am an absolute beginner, and thank you for responding to my comment. Okay, so back-end development, I actually can't help you much with, but if anybody else wants to respond to your comment and help, I am a front-end developer. I don't know back-end development. I don't know it at all. And there are many different flavors of back-end development. Front-end is very simple. It's always HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. Back-end could be a whole bunch of different languages. And so it'll depend on what language you're specifically interested in learning. But hopefully somebody can respond and give you some good sources for learning back-end development. I'm sorry that I can't help much with that, being a front-end developer for 30 years. All right. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll see you 2 weeks from today for another accessibility topic. And I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful 2 weeks between now and then. Thank you so much.